Hello and welcome to the Blaston commentary series or something. I am your host, Robo President. And in this series, we go ahead and we critique my awful gameplay. We talk about Blaston news, events, happenings, and we just talk Blast on. It's all unscripted because scripts are for simps. Remember that. And in this ongoing series, in today's episode, we're going to be talking about Smurfing. At least for now. It's highly coincidental that we have Bear Blast on screen that has absolutely nothing to do with today's topic, I swear. But I want to cover the topic of Smurfing. This is something that I think has been talked about to death in other games on the efficacy of Smurfing, if it is something that Blaston should police tighter or at all. We're going to talk a little bit about, what the definition of Smurfing is, how it's currently looked at, and where, how it could potentially affect the integrity of Blaston's standings, and some arguments for and against it either way. So, let's jump into it. So, what is Smurfing? Now, Smurfing is a bit of a term that's brought in from other games. A Smurf is a high-level player who makes a low-level account to hide their skill from somebody else. So if you're Smurfing, you're basically hiding your power level. You're coming in, you're looking like somebody you're not, and then you completely blow them away with your skill that you shouldn't have. And in Blaston, a game of physicality, a game of body movements, a game where you can see how people move, it is actually quite easy to pick out Smurfs. I know there's a lot of false accusations that get tossed around, and sometimes that can give a bad name to good Smurf detective work that happens. But in Blaston, your body language has a tail. So Smurfing can get picked out pretty easily, and I'm not going to name any names here, but certain people who may or may not be getting shot at have a tail when they play as other people. So a Smurf, it just in its most simple form, is somebody who is trying to hide the fact that they're a lot better than somebody else. Now, there's a couple motivations for why somebody could be Smurfing. Now, somebody could be Smurfing because and I'm not going to say whether this is right or how I feel about this yet, I'm just going to explain it. Somebody could be Smurfing because they feel as if they don't want to lose points on their main account. So perhaps they feel that the Smurf account is a practice account for them. So perhaps this is a totally benign use for a Smurf account. They might want to practice other play styles that they don't want to develop a certain level of risk for yet before they transition those skills over to the main account. Do I think that's necessarily correct in the context of Blaston? Well, I'm going to get into that. But that's one reason why somebody could be Smurfing in a benign sense. Now, in a more malicious sense, someone could be Smurfing to potentially trick or befuddle people, because there's nothing like being new to the game and somebody completely raffle stomps you, just butt flusters you because their skill is so far beyond. You've never seen anything like it. You're new to the game. You've had it for 5 days, and this dude comes in and completely spin flip kicks you in the face, and you're just done. You're toast. That's one other reason why someone could be Smurfing, is to get a rise out of you. I don't think this happens very often in Blaston. I talked about it in the last episode. The community is generally pretty good. Now, I will say, though, that there are, one of my main gripe with Smurfing, though, regardless of the motivations for it, I still think it impacts the integrity of what Blaston is meant to be. But I don't think that most Smurfing cases tend to lean towards the malicious sense. But they can, and sometimes they do. So that's another reason why someone could be Smurfing. Another reason why someone could be Smurfing, they I don't know, it could be an access problem. This could be kind of out of their control. Maybe they move between houses or something. I don't know. This is outside of the realm of something that I can really speak to. But let's talk about the LP issue. Now, if you're not familiar with what LP is, so maybe you're watching this and you've never played Blaston, you have no idea what I mean when I say LP. LP stands for league points. Those are the little points that you get from beating someone in Blaston. It's your rank. Does it really matter? Well, I mean, it's just fake points in a game, so it's not really a big deal. However, Blaston at its core is a competitive game, and it's designed around this philosophy that it's a 1v1 test of skill to the best of the balancing ability that the devs have been able to do, and they do a really good job. You know, outside of some of the things that we've talked about, the minor flaws, I personally think the game is pretty well balanced. Bounce guns aside. The game is very well balanced, all those gripes aside. Really, it is. So this game is truly a test of skill, and it's meant to reflect an honest test of skill. And so when you jump in, there's an inherent level of risk when you jump into queue. So win or lose, when you lose, your losses should reflect that risk, because it's a test of skill. You shouldn't be able to slink on by because you had access to another account, or because you had a different headset, because you had money and you could just flop it on the fly. I don't think that. I think that kind of takes away from the spirit of the game a little bit, personally. So I don't think that's a worthwhile excuse. Blaston is 1v1. I want to fight that person. I don't want to fight their many masks. You know, I want to know that when I beat them in battle, I've made a effect on them and them alone. So, reason number one. Reason number two, and this one is important too, is, you know, and this has happened. So sometimes a Smurf will, you'll beat a Smurf, and they'll come back with a build to counter you, because maybe you caught them off guard on their main account, or maybe you caught them on their Smurf account, and they'll flop back to their main account with a counter build to your build. And then you'll take the league point loss, and they'll be safe, which is kind of lame. So that in itself is also not great, because then, you know, it's said, like, well, if you can't beat them, then what's the deal? Well, the deal is, then why didn't you just play with the main account? I don't know. I don't really think there's a good defense for it either way, to be honest. So my personal feelings on the matter when it comes to Smurfing, just, I don't know. The devs at this time, it's allowed. Personally, it's allowed. It's not a bannable offense. It's not something that has been really looked at as a main core issue. There's bigger issues. There's bigger fish to fry, to be completely honest. So I don't think that's something that really is going to be addressed. I mean, there's bigger balance issues too that need ironing out, like some of the, like Tank Nova, for example, or I don't know, the Bounce Luma collision. That needs to get fixed before Smurfing. But I don't think that just because it's not on their radar, that just makes it okay. And, you know, there's some kind of inherent moral value to it just because it's legal, and, you know, absence of illegality makes it morally correct. So I would just err on the side of caution, you know, especially if you're a top player, a very top player. You know, be careful. If you have a Smurf, that's not necessarily a wrong thing, but just be mindful of how you use it. If you're using it in a way to take LP from people, yeah, it's probably not the best. But if you're using it just to screw around and whatever, it's probably not a big deal, to be completely honest. So you know who you are. If you're flip-flopping out there, getting the W's on people, and then boosting both your accounts, taking up top 10 spots, and it's the same person, come on. Come on. But if it's not, if it's just something that's sitting out there, out of the leaderboard somewhere, it's not really a big deal. So, Smurfing, lame, cringe, not based. Personal opinion. So, that's pretty much all I've got to say about that. Let's transition into another topic. Let's talk some gameplay. I know we've been ranting about Smurfing. Pretty much all today. This has been the Granth Power Hour for some reason. I had Bear Blast in the first game, you know, of tonight, of this particular queue session. And I kept getting Granth over and over and over. I don't know what the deal with this was. In the Discord at the time, I know Tim and a couple others were lurking, trying to get games, but they weren't. So I don't know what the deal with that is. Sometimes it seems like in queue, there will be people who are trying to get games, and it seems like queue is broken for them. And it just doesn't work. But I just kept getting Granth over and over. So he was just getting... This was his trial by fire with him and I. So today's build was a little interesting. I decided to go with Tank Nova. I know... I still think it should be nerfed. But I was using it because why use Tank Nova? It's your new double shield. It's 7 seconds. So I don't see any reason in using double shield when I can just use Tank Nova. It's the same thing. And then I decided to supplement it with just some light small arms fire, essentially using Speed, Wildcat, and Raptor, and then also my hammer nades to make a pseudo brain dead clamp. Basically, this is a very cheapo loadout. Basically, when I don't feel like putting in effort, this is sort of the loadout to go to at the moment. For me, you block the opponent's bullets with those Tank Novas, or you can just collide into the Novas so they cancel each other out. And then when the slow hammer nade is out in play, giving me that clamp, I will do a forward push and start mag dumping. And it works pretty well because the cycle count is, I'm sorry, the cooldown cycles so well due to it being low, and you just rinse and repeat. And the Tank Nova allows you to play defensively because you can lay them proactively. I could just lay them out, so I'll grab it right here, and let's start popping them out. Now, Granth has picked up on this. We played, as I've been ranting here about Smurfs, you can see that he's noticed, so he's gone to try to counter my Tank Novas either by blasting him with his Hammer E or blasting him with his own Tank Nova. Now, here's the problem in his case. And my critique of his particular use, Granth has actually been improving a lot lately. His ground play, you can see there, like his ground dodging has gotten pretty good. The cycle speed on his loadout and how his build is cooling down, I think is a little too slow. It's too heavy. So he's got the Viper E there, which he wants to use as his main damage dealer, but then he's got a Bounce Luma, and I think a Bounce Luma is a decent utility / damage dealer in and of itself, and you can use that to do low cooldown damage dealing. But then he's got this 7-second Tank Nova here, so and then he's got the nade to try to, you know, balance out his build a little bit. And then here comes the Hammer E, and the loadout ends up being a little bit heavy. So what ends up happening here is I can cycle out a little bit faster than he can with lower damage weapons. And half the time, he's only got 1 or 2 weapons up when I've got 3 or 4 most times, and it just overwhelms him. And that's really what you want with Tank Nova, is you want to keep your weapons up. You want to keep your Nova up. First and foremost, you want to keep that Nova up, and you want to keep your cooldown low. Because your Tank Nova should be your first, you know, whacked out as it is, it should be your primary form of defense, because that's what you should be centering your build around. If you're deciding to go with the Tank Nova build, personally. That's the only reason why you picked it, right? You picked it for defense. You're not picking it for trapping. Trapping is a wonderful bonus. Trapping and lane control are its 2 primary functions. So, I think one thing Granth would benefit here, obvious, duh, you know, everyone's gonna be like, well, no doy. you know, he's got some pretty good Viper E curving there. I wonder why, you know, maybe he just hasn't gotten the clamping part yet, like just the curving on the hammer E. He shoots sort of that straight hammer E, a lot like I did in Crackdown before I learned to curve. And to be honest, I learned to curve after watching, I think it was Spine's video. May he rest in peace. Watching his video on the matter and learning that sort of, and actually playing against him and watching that sort of sideways clamp. And that was, I think most people will attribute that video to opening the floodgates. More people, you know, people were clamping before then. I mean, JJ was obviously like that's where that term got coined. It's not like Spine didn't invent it, but Spine helped make it more accessible, I would argue, than just watching people do it. So that's where I learned it. And that, and I had private sessions. Golden Knight and I, we were doing some filming for a video of his, and Golden Knight actually sat there and taught me how to curve the hammer E. Before then, I couldn't figure it out for the life of me. I was just sitting there shooting it like a dork in people's faces. If you watch a lot of old gameplay of mine, I would usually go to the back of the podium and try to use it to just spam hammer E as wide as possible and then fill in the gaps with a wildcat or something. And that's kind of like what Grant is almost doing, sort of, when he's not trying to counter my ridiculous tank novas. So just interesting observation. So what I'm getting at is he's going to evolve. And when he does, it's going to be wild. But the Majestic Nade is interesting. I see it. There's two ways it gets used. I think of the Majestics, I think it's probably the most useful when used skillfully, because its low cooldown time allows it to be cycled way faster than Super Majestic. It doesn't have the damage, but you shouldn't be using Majestic for damage. If you are, you're not using it correctly. That's a side bonus. You know, if you get all that massive damage on Majestic, that's nice. That's a wonderful, like, oh yeah. Like, that's kind of like your opponent stepping out of bounds. You shouldn't rely on your opponent stepping out of bounds, but it sure does help. Helps you get that W. In the case of a high Majestic damage incident, sort of the same thing. But what the Majestic Nade does when placed correctly is really consistent and fast area denial. So I think some of the best placement of the Majestic Nade that I'll usually see is probably JC12. And there you go. Look at that. Grant getting around on me. I don't know what I did. I think he knocked me with, what was that? The Viper E to the gut. Good shot there. But JC12 will have some really good Majestic placement. And what he'll usually do, he'll use it two ways. For distraction, because it's so low CD, he doesn't really care if he doesn't get anything with it. He doesn't even care if it pops too far over my head. He wants you to reach up and grab it so he can shoot you with the Viper E. That's all he really cares about, because that's one of his main damage dealers. So he'll usually use it for that, or since it's so cheap, he'll toss it out just to stop you from going to a particular side of the podium that he wants to control. So I think it has a lot of great utility because of its cheapness. It's just really hard to use. It demands skill. It demands a lot of skill. You just got to get that timing right. And I think Grant knows that. He's just learning. He really wants to get right. And he's actually really good at those nade catches too. He's been catching a ton of my nades today. Every time I throw up a nade, he just flies up and grabs that thing and throws it right back at me. Does not care. He's a madman. So pretty good nade returns on Grant. Going for those Viper Eat Swipe Swipes and that cursed bounce Luma. Ugh, man, hate that thing. So and then of course, interesting dodge pattern. I never really thought, like, obviously when you're dodging, you want to try to keep yourself as small as possible. But he's got a pretty interesting way of doing it, putting his hands up high. I usually try to keep mine in, but that works too. He'll keep his high above his head. That's one way of making sure your hands don't get hit. Maybe that helps with the jumping. I don't know. It's beyond my. It's, I don't know. Just didn't really think about it. I just try to keep my arms in. Keep my arms in. Keep them tight. Okay. Hey, Granth again. The Granth Power Hour. It looks like this is the last game of the night. So this is officially the Granth show. And he gets off those quick. He's gone away from the Luma. I'm sorry, the bounce Luma, and gone to, I think that was either the straight Luma or the curve Luma. And I think one of the strengths of the Luma, both in any of its variants, but especially the non-shotgunny versions, is if your opponent, like in that case, I think I looked away for 2 seconds. I don't know what I was doing. I was probably picking my nose or something. I glanced away for just a moment, and right at the start of the round, he just unleashed on me and got a quick 40 damage, which now I have to make up this difference here in this round if I want to win this round. And because that's one of the strengths of the Luma is sneak attacks, and that's what he did. So excellent tool. But that grenade did it, and just like we've talked about before, the insta-kill time, like that insta-kill zone on the hammer nade is a lot bigger on the slow nade, and he kind of walked right into that one, unfortunately. So it just turned that entire match around. And there's that crazy collision difference on the bounce Luma. You can see it right there. He dumped 3 arrows into 1 tank Nova, and it did not pop. It only popped 1 tank Nova. But if you watch the previous games, not that you're going to rewind anyway, because nobody, who does that? But if you were to rewind, you will notice that those bounce Lumas from before were popping the tank Novas instantaneously in 1 draw of the bow. So definitely, I think, as discussed in episode 3, that's got to change, because that's wild. And obviously, Tank Nova doesn't need to be as strong as it is, but we've already talked about that too. And I've mentioned that like 10 bajillion, more billion times. And there goes another instant grenade pop, and that will be the end of the Granth Power Hour and the end of today's commentary. Thank you so much for watching the Blaston commentary series or something. I am your host, Robo President. You know the drill. Like, subscribe, favorite even if you really want to. And we'll see you on the next episode. Peace.